Glad you can hang out for the next 45 minutes or so. This is Patrick Coffin. Huge topic today, marriage. It's been defined for millennia as the lifelong union of one man and one woman that's open to the adventure of parenthood till death do them part. Nowadays, not so much. How do we talk about marriage so defined, which, by the way, predates Christianity and Judaism, without ending up on someone's hate group list? Well, today we're going to talk about marriage, how to discuss it from faith and non-faith, strictly secular points of view with Dr. Jennifer Roback-Morse of the Ruth Institute. Huge topic. Don't miss today's broadcast. Subscribe, rate, and review. Marriage, how to talk about it with clarity and charity. Coming up straight ahead on The Patrick Coffin Show. Yes, indeed. Welcome aboard. Our guest is Dr. Jennifer Roback-Morse, foundress of the Ruth Institute, a global nonprofit organization focused on two main things: keeping the family together and protecting the rights of children who've been harmed by family breakdown. So if that's you, especially, pay attention. You're going to get a ton out of the next conversation. I would recommend that you start with her book, The Sexual Revolution and Its Victims, and from then you can move on to a shorter work called 77 Non-Religious Reasons to Support Man-Woman Marriage. Dr. Jennifer Roback-Morse, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Patrick. It's a blast to be on with you in your new gig.
In my new circus, yes, indeed. So listen, there's so many things to say. I have the challenge of picking which is my first question. So let me ask. Here's my first question: were you surprised, or not so much, to be on the Southern Law Poverty Center's hate group list?
Well, we've been on that list since 2013. So when it came up at the beginning, yes, I was a little bit surprised, but not entirely, Patrick, because I knew that there were people kind of following me around on the internet, listening to every word of my podcasts and picking out things that I said that they considered mean, and they would show up on various blogs and places. So there are probably a couple interns and probably paid bloggers, people paid by Human Rights Campaign or something like that. I don't know. I don't know how they do it exactly, but I knew there were people going around taking two sentences at a time and proving that I was a hater. So, yeah, when I showed up on there, it's like, okay, that's what this was all about. That's why they had somebody combing through my stuff.
Well, this is where we're at. This is the situation we're in, where people who believe that marriage is the lifelong union of one man and one woman that's inherently tied to sexual congress and the adventure of children till death, we think the other side is wrong, and we're willing to find common ground and maybe debate and get to first principles. But they think we're evil, and we're full of hatred, so we have to be silenced. That's not an equal playing field.
Well, the reason they do that is because they know they're wrong. You know, their position's completely irrational, so they can't debate it. The only thing they can do is to somehow change the subject and divert people from the reality, you know, and so that's what's been happening to me for quite a while. I mean, there for a while before the Obergefel decision, I was doing debates on law school campuses, quite a few debates, and I believe that I was routinely winning them, and I was coming in there with arguments that people weren't used to hearing. And so at some point, people decided that this was no longer a debatable topic. And so that's the way you win, you know, is you never play. And so I think that's been true of the whole sexual revolution. You know, if you want to put this within the context of my book, The Sexual Revolution and Its Victims, the pattern throughout has been we've got this idea, we love the way it makes us feel. It'd be so great if we could have sex without having babies. It'd be so great if men and women were equal. You know, it'd be so great if we could just switch up our sex partners whenever we feel like it, and nobody was ever hurt by that. So we'll just make stuff up as we go along, and then when the inevitable lie of that starts to surface, they've just got to shut people up because they can't defend those ideas in the raw, so to speak.
Right. So they can call you a hater, they can call you a bigot, they can call you a trans, all the phobe rhetoric, right?
That's right.
But they can't they've never said you're wrong.
That's right. You'll notice. Very interesting point. They never say that you're wrong. And the truth is, what they really hate about me, I think, Patrick, is that I'm not afraid of them. if I was really afraid, I'd be cowering in the corner, never saying anything. But the fact is, I'm not afraid, and I say kids need their own parents. And redefining marriage is going to redefine parenthood in ways that are going to be damaging to children needing their own parents, the social idea that children need their own parents. And so I just keep saying that, and I'm not afraid at all to say that because I know I'm right. So,
yeah. Well, let's start with children, because children are almost invariably the forgotten players in the debate,
yes.
because we've in some ways, and this is not a gay rights movement followed, I don't think. Perhaps since the 60s, marriage has subtly shifted from something necessarily to do with the openness to children and procreation. I mean, all Christians believed that until 1930. But now,
That's right.
just kind of in the common ethos of when we think of marriage, it's an emotional bond between two people, and therefore children are, if not icky, we don't even talk about them. They're not even on the table
That's right.
as a subgroup.
That's right. And so that's why you need to understand, people need to understand the whole debate over gay marriage or genderless marriage or the redefinition of marriage. That whole debate would be unthinkable if we hadn't already redefined marriage 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago to say it's just the union of two people who happen to like each other for the time being. Mm-hmm. And there's no presumption that it's permanent. There's no presumption that it's sexually exclusive. There's no presumption that it's open to life, So if you take all those things out, it's like, well, why not? Let's let two guys get married, If you've got a sterile, temporary union of people who happen to like each other, why not let two guys do it? But and that's why what we want to say at the Ruth Institute is if you look at children and the impact of all of this on children, you'll see that the problem is much deeper than whether we let two men get married. The problem is deeper, more long-standing, and we've got to address that. If we don't address it, we're never going to get anywhere.
Did you dream when you started the Ruth Institute that it would be so badly needed now? I mean, you were sort of ahead of the curve. You were defending marriage before defending marriage was cool.
It's still not cool.
Well, it depends on the circles that you travel in, I suppose.
That's right.
Would there have been a need for the Ruth Institute, let's say arbitrarily 1957? Is that when things began to uncouple? Pardon the metaphor.
I think it's so hard to answer that, Patrick, and I'll tell you why. The damage was being done, and people didn't realize what was going on, right? So when Kinsey comes out with his big reports talking about how secretly everybody's doing it, and secretly people are not living chaste lives, and people are cheating on their spouses, and so on and so forth, that really was a big deal. But people didn't realize how big of a big deal it was, and people didn't realize how much there were rich people in the background promoting Kinsey, promoting his message. People weren't asking themselves why the Ford Foundation was so keen to promote Kinsey and his message, Yeah. And if those people hadn't been promoting him, Patrick, he would have been a 2-bit bug doctor with a masturbation problem. Nobody would have ever heard of the guy, right?
Will that fit on a T-shirt? I can just see it. Instead of Che Guevara, a picture of Kinsey and what you just said. Good T-shirt idea.
Who would wear such a thing? I don't know. But anyway, I mean, we have always needed to be defending our sexual ethics, but we didn't really see why we needed to. Okay, and so it's been creeping up on us for, 50 years at least, maybe more. And we've never had to explain why kids need their own parents. We've never had to explain that men and women really are different, So when we look at other issues that have to do with, tradition or conservative values or things like that, you can look back hundreds of years and people have already worked out the arguments. But the arguments in favor of the family, we're just now figuring it out that it even needs to be defended. So we're not like at the Ruth Institute, we're a combination research group and activist group, which we kind of have to be because nobody's done the research and people aren't willing to do appropriate activism in defense of the family. And you really can't be completely appropriate if you don't get what's going on, And so there are a lot of people, well-meaning people, good, decent people, who are kind of wandering around in circles, nipping at the heels of the problem and not really getting to the core of the thing. So that's where I think the Ruth Institute comes in. And in 2008, I didn't expect I'd be doing what I am doing today. It just wasn't on my radar at all.
Well, people forget that these roots began to be shaken long before hippies and free love in 1968 in Woodstock. Kinsey's report came out in 1948. And then I think a big watershed event was the 1957 Roth Supreme Court decision, which gave pornography grounds on the basis of free speech. As opposed to obscenity. That was very, very huge because that led to movies like The People versus Larry Flint, where pornographers are now First Amendment rights pioneers. Now you have the appeal of the Ruth Institute includes Jews and Mormons and Christians of all varieties, but your focus is not biblical based primarily, but on definitional a definitional basis and the social research data that shows the fallout of all these victims of this misbegotten experiment known as the sexual revolution. Marriage is in the crosshairs, right? So you're not primarily a group with a faith-based only approach.
Oh, no, absolutely. And in fact, that's part of our appeal. If I were standing here reciting Pope John Paul II of blessed memory, if I were just to be reciting his stuff, a few people would get it and would like it, and it's wonderful stuff, but there'd be a whole lot of people who wouldn't get it, or, but if you say, look, kids need their own parents, and here's how we know that. There's evidence from the social science. I bet you, whoever you are listening to me, I bet you have reason to know that from your own experience. When you talk to people like that, then a lot more people can look at it and go, yeah, you're right, you got a point, and it doesn't matter what your faith experience is.
Give me some non-religious reasons why marriage should be defined as one man and one woman.
Well, the basic reason is that children need their own parents, and if you start from the premise that children are owed something, and you reason outward from that premise, Patrick, you will end up pretty much with traditional Christian sexual morality, right? And so the way that applies to two men getting married or two women getting married, or society calling that a marriage, the way that affects it is that traditionally parenthood has been determined through two things. The mother is presumed to be the mother of the child. The person who gives birth to the child is presumed to be the mother of the child. Well, with surrogacy, that's now out the window. Okay, the person who gives birth to the child, may be an employee, a contracting partner, and she gives birth to the child, and the presumption is that it isn't her child. So that's one thing that's gone down the tubes. And the other way you determine the father is that the mother's husband was presumed to be the father of any children that she gave birth to during the life of their union. And so if you've got man-woman marriage and you've got a presumption of sexual fidelity throughout the union, you're attaching kids to their biological parents. So as soon as you say that you don't need those things, you don't need fidelity, and you don't need a man and a woman, children are going to be attached to adults in some other way. It's going to undermine the biological basis of parenthood. And this, to me, it should be self-evident that this cannot be a good thing from the perspective of children. We just know too much about the human condition to believe that this is really okay.
How much has the contraceptive mentality tainted the environment such that men can now use women as masturbation tools and then flee the scene? So they've got the sperm donation element, but they don't have the life commitment element, thanks to this little thing approved in 1960 called the pill. How profound has been the introduction of contraception and its mentality into what you're talking about?
Well, I'm glad you broke it down that way, Patrick, because really it's the ideology around contraception that's much more significant than the technology itself. Because, if you look over demographic history, you will see periods of time where people have drastically reduced their fertility. They did it through coitus interruptus, Right. So the technology is there. What's different is that surrounding the pill, surrounding the production and development of the pill, were a group of people who wanted that contraceptive ideology. And the contraceptive ideology says that every person who is old enough to give meaningful consent is entitled to whatever sex life they want. And the business of the government and all of society is to remove all the inconvenience associated with that.
Right.
That's the mentality. That's where we are. And that a good and decent society should do everything possible to separate sex from babies. So once that idea is a very toxic idea, because it means children are either a problem to solve if you don't want one, or the follow-on to that, they're an object to purchase if you do want one. And that's where we are today with the whole third-party reproduction industry and surrogacy and all of those type of non-sexual means of reproduction. It's fundamentally changed the role of the relationship between parents and children.
That is a gigantic schizoid thing. You just laid your hand on it. I never really saw it in one little insight like that. On the one hand, contraception has allowed us to see children as disposable things that we toward which we have what Germain Grisey calls a practical hatred. Not an emotional hatred. You're not going, I hate babies. But there's a practical hatred because you've worked to thwart the coming to be of that new person. And if that fails, well, then you need a safety net known as abortion. But on the other hand, children as property has risen at the same time. So this is why, we're talking millennia of biblical wisdom here. The children are gifts, and when they're in our arms, they have rights. The idea of children's rights is like, what? I thought I had rights. But you mentioned Coitus Interruptus. For folks who've never heard this is not a Latin hymn. And it's not a document by St. Pius X. So
stop it.
Yeah, we're talking good old-fashioned withdrawal method of contraception. It used to be called onanism, based on the story of Onan in Genesis chapter 38. Okay, very good. Just to clarify that. Sorry about
that. But here's the thing I want to point out about that and how it's related to marriage. Okay, so when the peasants of France were reducing their fertility levels, if withdrawal didn't work and they ended up with a baby, whatever, that'd be okay, right?
Oui.
Yeah. But in our modern sexual culture, people want a 100% safe, 100% reliable form of contraception because the plan is you're having sex with somebody that might be a disaster to have a child with, right? And so if you're wanting to sleep around, if you want to sleep with somebody who's married to someone else, you need a pretty serious plan, to make that work. And so the pill was developed literally with that in mind, Mm-hmm. They will never come right out and say that. But when you say, when you see advocates saying, well, 85% effective, that's no good. Well, wait. Actually, if you really truly were worried about Margaret Sanger's mother who had 12 children, and she always said that's what she was really worried about, was women like my mother who had so many children. If you were really worried about that, 85% effective would have been just fine because she could have spaced her kids. Yeah. But that was never good enough. That was never anywhere near good enough. And of course, the modern effectiveness of the pill is only about 90% anyway, not 80, it's nowhere near 100%, right? So you're going to end up with these little boo-boos that you have to get rid of through abortion. And that's how the contraceptive ideology feeds the abortion industry. That's why they can't permit dissent from it. That's why they had to shut up the Little Sisters of the Poor. You can't have people walking around saying, well, no, we're just not going to participate. It's not about freedom at all. It's about creating this fantasy ideology, this new brave new world where adults get to do whatever they want and kids are commodities.
Mm-hmm. And disposable. They need to be removed.
That's right.
Rhetorically from the conversation and actually from their lives.
That's right. That's exactly.
I debate my libertarian-minded friends on this question, and I always say that libertarianism is a philosophy for people who don't have any kids.
Yep.
I heard that. I thought that's true. Why is it that government ought to be involved in marriage and not on a different planet?
Well, I want to go back to what you just said because that was me, Patrick. I was a libertarian before I had kids. I never really thought very seriously about the implications of all these ideas for children. Mm-hmm. And so when I first started having kids, well, the way we had kids, I think you know this story, but probably a lot of your viewers don't know this story, that we had 2 children within 6 months' time. Mm-hmm. We adopted a little boy from a Romanian orphanage. He was 2.5 years old when we got him. And then 6 months later, we gave birth to a daughter. Yeah. So we have 2 kids 6 months apart, 3 years apart in chronological age. Well, having those 2 kids together showed me that kids need their own parents. They need their parents because you can just see, okay, here's what neglect looks like. Here's what average run-of-the-mill good enough parents look like. The difference between our daughter and our son, it was amazing, it was astonishing. And that made me think through, as an economist, as somebody who studies social systems, I'm going, we cannot go on doing what we're doing in this society of treating our sex lives as if it's our private property, and that kids will be fine no matter what we decide to do. That is not true. And we have no business talking like that, thinking like that. And furthermore, you cannot have a free society on those terms, because your freedom is going to collapse as you get more and more young people who enter into life unable to face life, unable to control themselves. And I was talking about this as early as 2001, and nothing has changed. Everything has convinced me that was correct. So all the serial killers who are fatherless boys, the large percentage in that category, the large number of guys who end up in prison or on drugs who have instability in their family lives, it's unbelievable, really. So that's the libertarian thing. I'm totally convinced that libertarianism cannot withstand contact with children, actual children, not theoretical children, but actual children. Mm-hmm. Now, what was your question before I got to
why is there evil? No, that was a different show. Well, I'm just getting. I was getting at the role of government, because there's conservative of a certain stripes will say, look, the governments, they misapply Ronald Reagan, who famously said the government's not the solution, the government's the problem. However, let's take religion and the faith question out of it and talk about the stability of a society. Why is it that government has a vested interest in promoting and defending marriage on purely secular grounds?
I think, Patrick, that we have a duty in justice to attach children to their parents. That to separate a child from one of their parents without a good reason, like somebody dies, right? It is an injustice to separate a child from their parent. And so if there's a question of justice, the government is really supposed to be involved, right? So the traditional definition of marriage did justice to the father and the mother and the child. It said, you guys are a unit, and nobody else is this child's daddy, and nobody else is this child's mommy. Grandma doesn't get a vote. Your next door neighbor with a PhD in child psychology doesn't get a vote. These two people are the parent of the child, and nobody else is. That is justice for the child. And now, instead of doing that, what the government is doing is finding different ways to break the family down. So no-fault divorce says children's right to their parents is something that occurs every other weekend, maybe, right? And that adults have no responsibility to be sexually faithful. They have no responsibility to keep their marriage stable. They have no responsibility. We're not interested in whose fault it was. We don't care. If you're an adulterer and you want to do sweetie for that, okay, fine. We don't care. And we don't care about that when it comes to even property settlement and child visitation and custody, and then the parenting plan. We don't look at behavior. And so what that has meant is that it's gross injustices to children. That's the most basic thing I can say about it. And then when you move further, as we are, since nobody really dealt with divorce, we just keep going. And the next step is third-party reproduction, where the government actively stands between a child and their parents and says, we got a binding contract here that says, you, guy who masturbated into a cup for $75, you are a legal stranger to the child, and we promise that your child will never know who you are, and that if you show up on the lady's doorstep and say, gee, I'd like to have a relationship with my kid, we'll throw you in jail. She can get a restraining order against you. I mean, it's crazy when you think about the government actively coming between a child and their parents.
And thus is born the anonymous us generation and movement started by our mutual friend Alana Newman. That's a really fascinating subcategory of this fallout, the phenomenon of anonymous sperm donors haunting the lives of the children. I don't think there's a day goes by they don't think about where their dad is, even if he is.
I think that's right. I know that's right. I know that's right. I know enough of those young people to know that this haunts them, and nobody's dealing with it. Nobody's dealing with it, except a handful of freaks like us. But, I don't care. I know I'm right. And so I don't care what the Southern Poverty Law Center says about me. I don't care if they say I'm a hate group. Fine, whatever.
Well, people who are paying attention would look at that as a feather in your cap. But let me ask you a devil's advocate question. Let's take children off the table, because there are valid marriages where children have not come to be. So what about that?
Well, what about that?
Well, if there are no children in a marriage that we can all say is valid, then why, now this is the devil's advocate version, why are you harping on children when marriage can exist without them?
Look, the point is, it's certainly true that not every marriage has children. That's certainly true. But every child has parents. And we need a legal structure that attaches children to their own parents. So the fact that two people get married who are perhaps past childbearing age, or they get married thinking that they're going to have children but they're unable to, those kinds of situations do not undermine the basic premise that children are entitled to a relationship with their parents. And the fact that those two people, maybe it's a young couple who've gotten married and they hope to have children, and I know a lot of people in this situation too, of course, I was in that situation myself. They can't get married. They can't have any kids. The fact that they're married and that there's a presumption of permanence and there's a presumption of fidelity, it means that those two people are out of the market and they're not messing around with somebody else's spouse. They're not prowling around looking for a fertile mate, And so that the fact that the same rules apply to them means that you're creating a whole environment where the presumption that children are to be attached to their parents, where that's going to be a stable presumption, and for the good of the whole society. And of course, it's sad not everybody can have children, and you'd like to do something to help them, but the fact is that's not fatal. Infertility is not fatal.
Yeah, there's a strange logical deficit that people have with regard to what causes pregnancy. Many people are raised to believe that pregnancy is caused by broken condoms and pills that don't work.
That's right.
It's actually caused by sexual intercourse.
That's it. That's
Johnny.
it. Yeah, I always check on that when I have a live audience in front of me, Patrick. I'll say, sex makes babies, and then I'll pause and go, okay, is everybody on board with that? And they always laugh because it's like, yeah, what do you think? But yeah, people think, I literally had somebody say that to me in a debate, Patrick. I said, sex makes babies. And this is a law school, one of my law school debates. And my opponent says, no, it doesn't. I'm like, oh, sex doesn't make babies? What do you mean? She goes, unprotected sex makes babies. Oh,
right.
See,
right.
This is how they think. This is how they think.
Different causal source.
Exactly.
Okay, so people listening right now who are essentially sympathetic to what we're talking about nonetheless will hear this or some version of this. How does Bill and Steve getting married affect your marriage? It's just none of your business. How can two men or two women who want to enter into marriage, how does that affect your marriage?
See, if all they did was have sex in the privacy of their own homes, it wouldn't be so bad. But they want marriage to be redefined to include what they're doing. And so what that means is that children and the natural production of children is marginalized from society. That's what it has to mean. And so, for example, in California, where you still live, from which I am a refugee, a grateful refugee.
We're both the prisoners and the guards here, okay?
Okay, well, that's very nice. I'm glad you're taking care of things, Patrick. But the terms husband and wife, mother and father have been removed from the legal code. I talked to a guy a few days ago, state of Virginia. They've appointed a commission in the wake of Obergefel to go through the legal code and figure out what has to be changed. And first thing's got to go is all the gendered language that's part of family law. That all has to go away. So does that affect me? Well, doggone it, I don't have a husband anymore.
Yeah.
Nobody has a husband anymore. We all have partners. We have generic spouses, say. And so it does affect people. Just like, people used to say before no-fault divorce, Patrick, people used to say something very comparable. They used to say, what does my divorce have to do with your marriage? Well, the fact is, they thought it was only going to affect a handful of people. Okay, we're going to have no-fault divorce because, we got about a 6% divorce rate. We're going to make it easier and cheaper for that 6% of the couples to get divorced. But what they didn't think about was that they were changing the incentives for everybody. They were changing the rules of the game and the playing field for everybody. no-fault divorce affected everybody's behavior.
Yeah.
Even if you didn't get divorced.
That's right.
It still affects you.
There's also a powerful imitative factor here. Have you heard of the Werther effect?
Not by that name, I don't
The Werther effect is from a book, I want to say by either Nietzsche or Edgar Allan Poe, 19th century writer, and it's about a guy who kills himself. When that book came out in Germany, there was in the months after its publication, it was kind of a sensation, a pulpy kind of novel. People killed themselves in much higher numbers the way the character did in the novel. So now it's a known thing in sociology, in criminal sociology, in which if a local high-profile suicide is published and the manner of death is included in the description, you're going to see in the coming weeks and months people imitating it. There's like a psychic contagion. The same thing happens, as our mutual friend Layla Miller points out, with divorce. There's a contagion. It's almost like an idea virus. Well, all these, good Catholic, in quotes, couples just opting for the no fault exit strategy, even if there was no violence, even if there was no spousal abuse. Right. I'm not happy, and what do? We don't want to have our kids see us unhappy, so we uncouple consciously, as Chris Martin and Gwyneth Paltrow did. So people, we forget how I think it was René Girard calls it the mimetic desire.
Yes, that's right.
To be part of a clique, and we want to have our decisions validated by other people deciding them. The same thing. You see what I'm saying?
That copycat effect is very powerful, and we're seeing that to some extent. People are very concerned about a copycat effect with respect to transgenderism. Kids seeing other kids spending a lot of time online on these sites where kids are talking about it, and one day they say, gee, I guess I'm a boy too, and there's actually a name for it. It's called rapid onset gender dysphoria.
Rapid onset gender
dysphoria. Yeah, and there are several websites of people who are, as one's called transcritical. I think it's called transcritical. I forget what it's called exactly, but it's a group of therapists who are freaked out at how easily kids are concluding that they're trapped in the wrong body, and it's very much a similar copycat type of effect. So, but with respect to gay marriage, I don't think that a lot of people are going to say, well, gee, I want to have a gay marriage. But I do think that there will be people who aren't gay who say, all things considered, it's going to be easier for me to move in with my best friend, and the two of us will have IVF babies, and we'll be happier with each other than either of us would have been with some crazy man, because after all, everybody knows men are crazy. So if us girls just do it together, it'll be fine. I think we could start seeing that type of thing.
Do you know Dawn Stefanowitz?
I do.
Yeah, I've interviewed her a couple of years ago when her book Out From Under came out, and she's kind of exhibit A of the psychic trauma and the confusion. Even if you love the partners who call themselves married of the same sex, there's something kind of obviously deficient in that, and I mean that neutrally. If you don't have the modeling of a mom and a dad, just two dads or two moms, you're going to be hobbled in some way. What's the social science data on that? I know it's a little bit new, but is there any kind of track record of how these people are likely to make out?
Yes, it is relatively new data on that. But and Dawn, I remember one of the things she used to say about that, you correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure it's Dawn who says this, that she felt that she was somehow wrong, that being a woman, being a girl, there was something wrong with her. She didn't have the sense of that she belonged anywhere, because she was in a very male environment that was not particularly interested in women or liking women, so even if
because it was a two-dad scenario.
It was a two-dad scenario, and extra being taken to gay male events and so on and so forth. So there was a kind of wrongness that she felt. But one of the things that you do see is a sense of there's one column in Mark Regnerus's famous study that absolutely fascinated me, because if you remember his study, he broke down he just for people who aren't nerds, who are complete nerds about this.
His new book's Cheap Sex, right?
Yes.
Mark Regnerus,
in 2012, he had this paper that was the first one to really show that there were problems with same-sex parenting. And what he did is he collected data from adults, people who were between the ages, I want to say between the ages of 20 and 30, something like that. And he asked them, did either of your parents ever have a same-sex relationship? And that was what he was basing it on. But he also knew, were your parents ever divorced? Were they remarried? Were you adopted? He had like 7 different categories, okay? And so one of the questions that he asked was, do you consider yourself completely heterosexual or something else? Okay. And so if you looked at that column, just at that question, the people who were most likely to say, I'm 100% heterosexual, were people whose own biological parents were married to each other and stayed married to each other. Every deviation from that produced a greater sense of, no, I'm not completely heterosexual. Now, the people who believe that there's nothing wrong with being gay, they look at that and they shrug, okay? But if you have any question about that, if you have any doubt about that, and you look at that and you go, well, you know what? The born that way idea doesn't really seem to work there, because if you were born that way, it shouldn't matter what happens with your parents, whether you're living with your parents or a step parent or a single mom or 2 men, it should that should not be that big of a deal, but it's a very big deal, and it drops off immediately from any difference between any deviation from mom and dad married to each other for a lifetime. And then by the time you get to 2 moms and 2 dads, actually it isn't really 2 moms and 2 dads. I should be careful. One of your parents had a same-sex relationship for any period of time, that factor gets much higher. So there's something to your suspicion that the development of one's sense of themselves as a male or a female, that requires or thrives when you've got a good, solid relationship between both of your parents, right? That's part of what allows us to develop a sense of ourselves as sexual beings.
Another example might be Professor Bobby Lopez, who was drummed out of Northridge University, raised by 2 men, himself for a while. 3?
Women.
Oh, okay.
Women.
Oh, women. Excuse me. Women.
Yeah.
And then I haven't really kept up with Bobby Lopez's story. I understand he's out of state. He's another refugee from California.
Yes.
But, even when he was identifying as bisexual, it didn't matter. He had touched the golden. Right. He touched the sacred cow. That's right. Yeah, he is. He's now at the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas. So he's, for all practical purposes, my next door neighbor, and he's a brilliant guy. And the fact that he was not condemning homosexual activity. He was just saying, this did not work for me, and by golly, we have a right to say it. As soon as he started talking like that, he emerged in the aftermath of Regnerus' study, actually. When that appeared, Dr. Lopez started talking about it, and then people started reacting to him, and he saw that it was important that he keep speaking out about it. And so a number of people clustered around him to share that experience, that, hey, there were plenty of problems here. Yeah, we've heard the phrase big oil, big tobacco, big pharma. He coined the phrase big gay. And when he went up against big gay, again, they ritually shamed him. They called him all kinds of nasty names, but they never said he was wrong.
That's right.
Kind of like you.
That's right. And see, it's another instance of the general principle that I pointed out earlier, that the fantasy ideology is that it doesn't matter who your parents are. As long as they're loving parents, it doesn't matter whether they're related to you, how many there are, whether they're male, female, same-sex, opposite. None of that matters. The kids will be fine as long as their parents are good people. And so when somebody says that's not true, when somebody challenges that fantasy ideology, you've just got to shut them up. They can't tolerate that kind of dissent. So Bobby was very important that Dr. Lopez be shut up, because he's a mixed race guy. He's bisexual. He's a brilliant guy, speaks multiple languages. I forget even how many, like 5 or 6, and that doesn't count Latin and Greek. He's a brilliant guy, a very credible guy. So the only thing they could do with him is shut him up. And of course, it's not working because he's still talking. But they certainly punished him, and he's landing on his feet. And I think in time he will stay on his feet.
Mm-hmm. There's something. When I look at the wreckage, post-'60s wreckage of the fallout of this no-fault divorce culture and the real-world victims of the contraception mentality and the kind of unconscious, maybe survivor guilt of those who beat Roe v. Wade after 1973 and are now walking around, they kind of dodged that bullet. In a way, there's something quaint about our defense of marriage as it's been defined for a few thousand years in light of the fact that the oligarchs and the far left who are pushing and writing big checks for this have already moved on to the next frontier. And I'm not talking about George Takei and Star Trek. I'm talking about the trans movement.
Right.
Okay, that's the new frontier. They got Obergefel Hodges, so it's like a forest threshing machine. They have to keep finding new Amazon forests to kind of gouge up. Is that the next part of the strategy?
Yeah. Well, look, it's like a continual revolution. Right. I mean, it was Trotsky who had this phrase of continuous revolution. You can't just let it sit there. You have to continue to have an enemy. You have to continue to have a new something new to attack and because the underlying thing is irrational, can't work, can't be made to work. So, when you obliterate private property and free markets and people start dying, well, you've got to have somebody to blame. So you blame the kulaks, and then you kill them and you starve other people. And, you just have all kinds of things you have to do to keep the dream alive, see. Mm-hmm. And so that's what's happening with the sexual revolution. You're quite right. When they got Obergefell, as soon as they got gay marriage, they didn't go running around saying, okay, let's let incestuous couples get married. Okay, let's have polyamory. They didn't worry about that, because the legal principle for that was already in place, and they didn't really care about that much anyway. And they also didn't really care that much about your lesbian niece having a white picket fence lifestyle with her partner. That's not really what they cared about. What they care about, Patrick, is very important for people to understand this. The end game for the sexual revolutionaries there are 3 points, okay? The gender ideology, the end game of the gender ideology is to remove all references to male and female from society and from the law. Completely androgynous society. That's the end game. For the divorce ideology, the end game is to completely disconnect legal parenthood from biology. Okay? And the solution, what they have in mind, is contract parenting. So surrogacy is the norm. Third-party reproduction is normal. That's the norm. And then the third point, the contraceptive ideology, the end game of the contraceptive ideology is population control. China. A lot of these people love China. They will never admit it, but they love having the amount of power that the Chinese government has to control everybody's fertility. Did you know that in China, the birth control police, the family planning police, 1 million people are part of the family planning police. That's the largest police force in the world.
I understand that's beginning to be rethunk. How's that for a word? Rethunk in China. There's some movement to relax the one-child policy, because they're kind of looking at the demographic. What's the word? Winter wasteland. Right.
Well, but the underlying principle they're not rethinking at all. They're giving more people permits for 2 children. But the underlying principle that the government has a right to be giving out birth permits, that's not in question whatsoever.
And all of this was predicted by a guy by the name of Giovanni Montini, who was selected Paul VI as his papal name. How Paul VI has been vindicated as a prophet. Because when he mentioned in, I think it's number 17 or so in Humanae Vitae, the government will move in with exigencies and controlling the number of children families have. People, are you nuts? Who's doing that? Well, enter China.
Yeah. And during that period of time, there was a period of time when everybody knew he was working on the encyclical and it hadn't come out yet. During that period of time, John D. Rockefeller III had an audience with him. Somebody arranged it. I forget who arranged it for him, but he had an audience with the Pope. And some say that he actually offered to help write the encyclical.
I did hear that anecdote. Yeah, it might have been a Kennedy or one of the Jesuits behind the Kennedys.
Probably so. But I'm sure it wasn't like an average parish priest kind of guy. It was somebody with a lot of horsepower, sort of social and political horsepower.
I think it was I think it was Theodore Hesburgh, the former president and emeritus. He's deceased now, of Notre Dame. I think that's the one who.
It's possible.
I'm going to look it up and put it in the show notes. But go ahead.
That's possible. That's possibly that. But here's the point. I have an image of the two of them meeting, and of the Pope looking at this guy, this rich American who's so sure he's right, who's so full of himself. And I wonder whether Rockefeller put it into his mind, holy guacamole, what is a guy like this going to do? If I take the brakes off of this, what is a guy like this going to do? And of course, that's exactly what Rockefeller had in mind. I mean, family planning, population control, that was his thing all over the world.
Yeah,
and
sure.
and of course it still is. So I don't know for sure, but I really wonder whether that was like, oh my gosh.
I cited an example of the chaos. We have to wrap up, but I'll leave you with this image. And I don't know if I've shared this with you before. I was privileged to interview the late, great Dr. Bernard Nathanson, one of the co-founders of National Abortion Rights. Actually, before he died of cancer, I was one of the last people to talk to him on the record in public, and he very kindly endorsed my book. In a conversation he had with Father Frank Pavone, he mentioned a court case in which a childless couple hires a surrogate mom and a sperm donor. Okay, and a child was conceived. And then there was an argument over parental rights that ensued because the birth mom, the surrogate hired, bonded with the child. And then in the end, the original couple divorced. So the judge determined that the true father of that child was none of these people. The true father was the lab tech that injected the semen into the woman, because it was his efficient cause that produced the paternal side of the equation known as pregnancy. The lab tech, the white-coated guy who just got paid that day on Tuesday or whatever to produce that pregnancy. So this is the pretzel logic endgame, is this chaos. And we know, God is the God of order. And boy, where are we going, Jennifer? And why are we in this handbasket?
Yeah. Well, I hope people will come and hang out with us at the Ruth Institute, because we're trying to do something about it. And we've got several programs that I think people would really be interested in. We've got a Healing Family Breakdown spiritual workshop. We've got book clubs for people to read up on some of this stuff and inform themselves and be able to reach out to others. I mean, that's the thing. These topics have become so sensitive. People don't know how to talk to their friends and neighbors and relatives about it. And anything we can do to make that easier, I think, is all to the good.
Amen. It's at ruthinstitute.org. You're going to find a whole community of like-mindeds of various backgrounds. This is not it's not a club or an organization that's related in any way to something sectarian. If you believe that marriage ought to be defined as it has been publicly for millennia now, independent of any faith content, the Ruth Institute is your one-stop shop. There's tons of stuff. There's books, DVDs, things that you want to hand to someone that people who are busy and don't have a lot of time to read. Great place to go. Jennifer, it's always a delight to talk to you. I always learn a ton. Thanks a lot for joining us today. I appreciate it very much.
Oh, well, thanks for having me, Patrick. It was a lot of fun for me, too.
All right. We miss you here in California. And even though you have survival guilt.
I feel fine, actually.
Maybe that's projection, classic projection. All right, very good. So ruthinstitute.org, and this is the Patrick Coffin Show. Be a saint. What else is there?